I realized at a certain point that if I didn't hit reset, I would never find out what that bigger thing was that I might be meant to do in this world. I remember there was this one moment I was in the middle of Croatia on the coast, and I was looking out at this beautiful sunset and crying and sitting by myself in my tent because I realized there wasn't anybody within 1,000 miles who even knew my name. I don't want to give anybody the idea that that journey was all magic. I mean, there was life-changing magic throughout it, but there was also a lot of challenge as well. So I think psychedelics can help. I think Michael Pollan's metaphor is like to shake the snow globe, loosens up those tracks in our mind and those like patterns of thought and behavior that we're really attached to, and helps us open up the options and create more space of possibility for what we want to achieve and create in our lives. Finding and building a life of purpose doesn't have to require like a dramatic reset like I did. It can be as simple as committing to a decision on a daily basis and watching the compound effects of that grow, staying in that space of possibility and creating small changes that don't require you to completely redo your life are oftentimes the most effective things for people, because it doesn't require this enormous sacrifice just to get started.
What does it mean to live your life purpose? That is a question we ask here at the Awakened Man. But before you can really dive into that question, you really need to know what it is, don't you? Now, there are many ways to go about that. And in my opinion, the best ones or the best ways to do that is for us to do some introspection. The challenge is in my busy mind gets in the way, and at times it can be pretty frustrating, but that's okay too, because it's all part of the process. And today, my guest shares his process that he has found to help him and his clients in their journey to living purposeful lives. But before we get into all that, I just want to remind you, if you're interested in raising your standards as a father, a husband, and an entrepreneur, then I encourage you to participate in our Band of Brothers group mentorship program. We're a group of ordinary guys working towards living extraordinary lives. And you can find all this information at the Awakened Man Training Academy at members.theawakenedman.net. And with that, let's get on with today's episode.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life, many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
Welcome, everyone, to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of the Awakened Man movement and your host, Alan DeMonso. Before we get into today's topic, let me ask you a couple of questions. Do you know what your life purpose is? And if not, why is it important to have one? Having purpose brings meaning into our lives. It is our raison d'etre or our joie de vivre. And now, not having purpose doesn't necessarily mean that our life is going to be meaningless either. It's just that you may not live with as much passion for life as you could if there was purpose behind it. Well, today, my guest is an expert in helping others discover and live their life purpose. Allow me to introduce my guest. Gabriel Dorita is a goal whisperer and a mushroom nerd who left his fancy tech job in 2017 to travel the world by bicycle, and in the process found his calling in coaching. He's a purpose alignment coach and a leadership development facilitator that helps individuals and teams align with what matters most while making effective connections with self and others. His work is rooted in neuroscience-based co-active coaching, authentic relating, and mindfulness with a spoonful of Japanese philosophy on to top it all off. He's also passionate, as we said, about cycling, foraging wild mushrooms, and the transformative power of psychedelics to heal ourselves and the world. Welcome to the show, Gabriel. How are things, my friend?
Thanks, Alan. Really appreciate you having me on today and excited for our conversation. Purpose is such a rich topic, and I was really excited to have this invitation to share.
Yeah, me too. We talk so much about purpose here at the Awakened Man. But before we even get into purpose, one of the things the other thing we always talk about is how all of us are on our own hero's journey, or we call it a hero's quest. And while I shared a bit of your story, tell us a little bit about something that inspired you to pursue your purpose and how that experience shaped you into the man you are today and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, that experience for me was pretty dramatic in the end. I did end up kind of quitting my job, leaving an 8-year relationship and moving onto a bicycle and traveling solo for like almost 2 years. But what led me to that was an experience that I now call spiritual inflammation, which I would just describe kind of as like an allergic reaction to my daily life. I knew I could keep doing it forever. I would be fine. I had a fancy tech job, like I said. Everybody at the time seemed to want had a loving partner, big group of friends, but something just didn't feel like it fit. I just had this sense of dissatisfaction and dissonance, and I was distracting myself a lot, working too much, drinking too much, getting into conflict with my partner, all the typical symptoms of just something being off, and I didn't know what it was. And I realized at a certain point that if I didn't hit reset, I would never find out what that bigger thing was that I might be meant to do in this world. And so that's kind of what led me to that decision, was this growing sense of dissatisfaction and dissonance, and trying things over and over to improve and them just not getting better. And realizing if I didn't make a conscious break, then I would just kind of stay trapped in this place of getting complacent with the dissatisfaction. And I didn't want to see that happen. And I had a promise to myself since I was, in my early 20s, that I would travel extensively. I wanted to see the world, and I was turning 30 that year, and I was like, all right, cool. I gotta, now or never. It's not going to get easier to do it. And so I think that was a part of the puzzle for me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I really appreciate about hearing you tell that story there, and I took some notes here, spiritual inflammation. What a great way to look at that perspective, to look at our life, about how we can be, allergic to what our life is. And just, we talk about as being sleepwalking through life, and same type of idea, right? Where we're kind of numbed out in getting up and just living a life. And we really don't have any meaning behind it other than I have bills to pay, right, and I'm supposed to be in a relationship, but don't really understand either how that serves us. And you were able to finally wake up. And now as we said in the intro, you said you're really passionate about cycling. And so you said you were gone on 2 years, but were you cycling through that whole 2-year period? And was it more, or was it the intent really an opportunity to help that self-discovery for yourself?
Yeah. The second half of the question is absolutely, it was a project of self-discovery. But I only was on the bike for about 9 months. I really took advantage of the summer in the Northern Hemisphere. And by the time it started to become winter, I ended the trip in Japan, and it was like getting to be winter in Japan. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'll mail my bike back to California. And then I kind of continued with a backpack through Southeast Asia, Nepal, and India. And it's a little bit tougher to ride a bike in the Himalayas than I think I'm capable of. So it was time to leave the 2 wheels behind. But I did have an intention when I set out to really find out, like, what is this next chapter for me? The journey itself wasn't just a bucket list. I want to cycle the Dolomites and I want to visit these shrines in Kyoto. It wasn't just about the destination. For me, it was very much a project of inward self-discovery too. And I used a Western adaptation of a Japanese concept that you probably are familiar with. Some men in your group might know, called Ikigai.
Yes.
This is a really, really popular idea. It doesn't mean the same thing in Japan as it does in the Westernized version of it, but the way that the West has adapted it through this beautiful Venn diagram of what you love, what the world needs, what you're good at, and what you can be paid for. And when I was in my tech career, I was good at sales, and I was well paid for it. But the world's need for another app was questionable and remains so. And I think I also really wasn't in love with what I had to do every day. And so I sought to find people along the journey who seemed, in my eyes, to have it together, to have that joie de vivre, as you said, that sparkle or that sense of purpose, and find out, hey, what do you have? What did you do to kind of get your life in that place? And as I was traveling, I was in Bali in Indonesia, actually, and I met someone who was a life coach at a workshop that I went to. And when she told me what she did, I was like, what? No way. Like, no, that's a thing. And became really committed to the idea of using my skills and the things that I was good at in service of what the world needed and something that I would actually love. And so it didn't actually feel like a big makeover to shift from sales to coaching, because a lot of the same things I was good at applied in a coaching context. My final objective wasn't to sell a product. It was to help somebody understand their experience in a deeper way and get more of what they want from their life. And so it was a very intentional project to me when I set out. to find out something, like my ikigai for myself. And I used that tool as I met people who inspired me to learn about their lives and discover what was out there that I didn't realize could be possible.
Yeah, for sure. And because, I like how I was making a note here about just how out in the West, how we take things, these great concepts and ideas how from the East, and how we just put our little twist on it and our spin, and it seems to work for us, yet it doesn't necessarily has the true natural meaning that it was first in its first intent. But you utilize that to really position yourself. And what I appreciated about what you were saying there is that you were able to look at that Venn diagram and put things into place that actually made sense. And I wonder, from your experience of as you started to do that journey, there had to have been moments of self-doubt and wonder after you had left your career and started on this journey. How did you deal with that? And how did you overcome those moments?
There were so many. And I'm really glad you asked that question, because often when I tell this story, people think about, the adventure and the novelty and the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. And I mean, it was work before, during, and after. Getting ready to make that choice was really hard. Telling my family, telling my partner at the time, quitting my job, like all that was one of the most emotionally difficult things I had ever done. And then, during the journey, like I remember there was this one moment I was in the middle of Croatia on the coast, and I was looking out at this beautiful sunset and crying and sitting by myself in my tent, because I realized there wasn't anybody within 1,000 miles who even knew my name. Mm. And that I was a complete unknown and a stranger, and like absolutely on my own. Nobody to help me, nobody to, like, I could text people on WhatsApp or whatever, but I really think that experience of being in sort of this wilderness of the soul, like really by yourself with your thoughts and your experience, was incredibly difficult and formative. I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was a beautiful part of who I am today, but I don't want to like sugarcoat that experience and say that 8-9 months mostly by myself on a bike was easy. There was a lot of deep soul searching and thinking, and not just physically difficult conditions of like, hot or dry or wet or, cold, facing the elements on the bike, but also just being with yourself in that process was very rewarding, but often challenging. And then when I came back, I remember this moment, I went straight back to California, and I met up with all my old friends from my tech world, and went on a weekend in Tahoe, and we were like river floating in Tahoe, and White Claw had been suddenly invented while I was gone, and everybody was drinking that. And like, I was just having this moment of like, whoa, I left this whole world behind. And like, these people were talking about, the mortgages they wanted to get, and like all the like, and I'm just like, oh my God, I've made this terrible mistake. I've shot my financial future in the foot. Just like I couldn't, like, the commission checks were outrageous in that industry. And so I realized that I still had the same social circle, but I didn't have the economic ability to compete and stay relevant in that high paced, fast, world of the San Francisco tech scene. And I thought, oh my gosh, have I kind of excluded myself by choice from this group of people, from this future that I want to be a part of? And in the long run, that turned out not to be true, because last year I actually made more money as a coach working for myself than I ever made in tech. And I think that's because I'm doing something I love, and so I'm committed to it. Yes. And so, but for that first year or two, that result was definitely not set in stone. It was very uncertain. And I remember having like a mini panic attack in the car in Tahoe with my friends, being like, oh my gosh, I am so far behind. You know what I mean? I spent my life savings on this silly thing, and like, what have I done? Kind of feeling was really, really intense when I first got back to the US. So I don't want to give anybody the idea that journey was all magic. I mean, there was life-changing magic throughout it, but there was also a lot of challenge as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for being authentic and sharing that. And because and that's why the opening question I ask all my guests is to talk about their hero's journey and their hero's quest, because the hero's journey, as we all know, right, has those moments of when there's lots of self-doubt. And it's how we emerge from that and how we transition through it is really what shapes and makes us. And so a lot of folks sometimes, and I shouldn't say a lot, for me, I want to always make sure that everyone understands the depth of the journey. It's not all roses and unicorns and everything's great. There are many moments of solitude and self-doubt and questioning. And, you're part of the story about, being 5,000 miles away from anybody that even knows your name. And sitting there, as on one hand, you're looking at it going, how exhilarating that you're able to do this. And then the other hand, the depth of the loneliness, right? But knowing that you were meant to be there is still the driving force behind it. It's that purpose that we're talking about here today. And I think that's, if there's any lesson out of that, that's the one that I got from what you were just saying.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that, because I realized I didn't fully answer your question, which was how I got through that stuff. I described the difficulty, but like what really kept me, pulled me through that, I think at a certain point was I realized I had made these choices for myself, and that I didn't have to do anything, but that I get to do everything. And that became especially important building my coaching business and creating a sustainable practice around this work that I love, was that I don't have to do any of this. I get to do this. And this is a privilege and a gift to be in this life, and to have this mind and this body and this process of self-inquiry and this ability to make choices and make sacrifices it's not a luxury that everybody has. And I think that for me, being really aware of the gift of that choice and the fact that the things that I was doing were freely chosen, gave me a lot of resilience to deal with the challenges that resulted from those choices.
Yeah, for sure. And the notes I just wrote down here was having to do something and getting to do something. And it's a different perspective to approach it. And even as I've been doing my work here and with the Awakened Man, there's still moments and times where there's still that transition phase of reminding myself that I get to do this. It's not something that I have to do.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to a life coach that I was training under, and he talked about how, for the first 5 years of his practice, when he was building his practice, that he still had his full-time job. And he needed that time, he needed that buffer to get himself into a position to where now his business is flourishing, and he's doing tons of great things here in Canada. And I thought, wow, that's so true, because not everyone will have necessarily the ability to just drop their job and go do something immediately into a position without having that bit of bankroll behind. And you decided to use yours as a really opportunity to challenge who you are and find out what really makes Gabriel tick. And I think it's important for us to understand that there's lots of different ways for us to transition from having to do something to getting to do something. And it all starts first with the mindset. And when we have that mindset, then we can start to take the actions and the steps to living a life of purpose.
Yeah, making those harder choices. You don't do anything you don't expect of yourself first. So you kind of need to be able to see that future to move towards it. And yeah, I didn't have a job to come back to. I didn't have a lease or anything. I don't have a mortgage, nothing. So when I left, I was sort of like, okay, fresh start. And when I came back and started my business, I had a bunch of LinkedIn recruiters reaching out to me for sales jobs. I had to say no to that juicy, $250 salary or whatever. But that was the only choice I had to make, was to not go back.
Yes.
Which was hard, but I didn't have to quit a job to do this. I had already done that part. So starting my business was sort of like I had the space for it. And, it's hard to say the pandemic was a good thing, but for me at that time, it kind of created, in a way, an excuse for me to not have any FOMO. And do you know what FOMO is?
Yes.
Fear of missing out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's let everybody know.
Yeah. So I have terrible FOMO. And for me to have a year start right when I got back to the US in 2019, and then the following year, nobody was doing anything. So I just had time to focus and work. I also had a socially acceptable excuse to move back in with my parents. So in many ways, the timing of that did support me in having that kind of crucible, that space to really dive deep and focus on building a skill set and getting training and building out a coaching practice. So I think the timing of that global event probably accelerated things for me by about a year or two.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are no accidents at all, right? And so had you not made the decision prior to that to transition from your tech job into doing the journey, then you may have still just be in a tech role today. But and I think that just that things are so synchronous when we take a moment and just go, "Man, how I got here today is all based on the decisions I made yesterday and the day before that and the day before that and the day before that." And when we can look at that and take a moment and have an appreciation for it, we can really start to enjoy our life. And maybe there's moments in our lives where we're not thrilled about the decisions we've made. And that's okay too, because at least we're dealing in reality and we're getting ourselves back to a position of understanding that, okay, now I can start to take responsibility for an aspect of my life and make decisions to hire a coach or do whatever you need to do to move forward. Because that's really all we're working here to do, is to become better individuals as we spend our time on this ball of earth that's spinning around.
Yeah, and Alan, I want to take a moment to reflect on what you said there, to remind folks who are listening that finding and building a life of purpose doesn't have to require like a dramatic reset like I did. It can be as simple as committing to a decision on a daily basis and watching the compound effects of that grow, because that's what the work I do with clients and individuals, teams. I do this with leaders, I do this with organizations, I do this with just private citizens. And the common denominator is always like starting with those values and understanding the small changes that you want to make to build something different in your future. And it really can be incremental. Mm-hmm. It can start with things that seem small, but even something as simple as a commitment to spending an hour a day outside, or it might lead you to bump into someone into a park who offers you a job guiding river rafting trips next summer in your town, right? You have no idea. Yeah. So just staying in that space of possibility and creating small changes that don't require you to completely redo your life are oftentimes the most effective things for people, because it doesn't require this enormous sacrifice just to get started.
Absolutely. And that's so true. And thanks for bringing that point forward, because it is true. It is about the smaller, it can be totally about the smaller decisions, and they are. And you've probably made several small decisions up to the big decision in order to finally get you there, right? And even though we're talking about the big one, you're absolutely right. It takes time, and all we need to do is just make the 1% idea of change is changing small little increments, and gets us to the point that we ultimately want to be. Now, I also talked about in the intro about that you've been involved in using psychedelics as a way to help people grow and transform. What would you tell somebody who is curious about stepping into that field, and how do you go about working with folks?
I would say the first thing that I would get curious about for yourself is your why. What's really driving your curiosity for this? Is it just because it's the hot new thing? Is it some hoping for a silver bullet? Like what's the motivation behind this? Because they are powerful and potentially transformational allies in a growth process, but they also carry a lot of risk. It's also worth mentioning like a legal risk. They're not regulated. They're not legally accessible in many places. Mm-hmm. And so really making sure that you understand a kind of a clear reason for wanting to approach them and what your intent would be, I think is a great place to start. And also looking to community to guide you. Because in an unregulated space, it's hard to vet the quality of a care provider or a source of material. And so really connecting to your local community through like a psychedelic society, or finding integration circles, or people who are locally involved in that space. Either maybe it's in the advocacy space, maybe there's a decrim nature chapter that's in your area that's trying to work to change the law. Those are people who will probably have some level of integrity and can help guide you to a place of safety in this, because I think it's a community-based movement right now. And so community is the only way to find out what's going on around you. And it's also a chance to get connected to other people who are in that process for themselves. Because a lot of the work I do is around integration. So I'm not sitting with people in a journey. I'm helping them kind of pre and post integrate the lessons and set those intentions well. And a lot of support that people need just comes from having someone to talk to who understands what that experience is like. And so if you don't have a lot of people in your immediate community who would understand that desire or that decision to take a psychedelic drug for self-growth, it's important you surround yourself with people who are coming from a similar place. And so I can't stress the importance of that community aspect enough, of really building those relationships, either physically, locally, or, you find a digital community that can support you.
Yeah.
I think that's the first place to start, and ask questions, get curious, and get a second opinion. Don't just listen to this podcast or, watch Fantastic Fungi or something and suddenly say, I know what I want, or I know what I need. Go out and find a second, third opinion. Find out somebody else who's had an experience, who's maybe done what you have hoped to do, and find out what their results were from that process. Really learn from what others have done. I really think is a great place to start, just with a lot of curiosity, a lot of humility, and go slow. Don't jump right into it and think, oh, I read this John Hopkins study said this cures depression, so it's going to cure mine. I think people are really excited about psychedelics, and I'm glad that they are. But I really want to be a voice of reason and caution around this, that they aren't a silver bullet. And they oftentimes just help us open the door to our own work, but they're not going to like walk through the door for us. You know what I mean? They're not going to keep the door. We are responsible for creating the outcomes in our lives that we want. All psychedelics can help us do is see a different perspective on that, or help us understand something in a more fundamental way or through a different lens. But ultimately, we need to be the people who carry that wisdom forward and weave it into the fabric of our lives. So the psychedelics aren't going to do that for you. And they're not going to heal the world either. I think, the Aztecs used psychedelics and they still had blood sacrifices. So it doesn't like automatically heal a culture when it's integrated psychedelics. I really think it has a lot to do with intent, and taking those lessons forward that makes the difference.
I completely agree with that. And I think what's really important with what you're saying here is that it is something that, and I know I've been doing some other research on this, and because I have a son that doesn't make healthy choices when it comes to hard narcotics. And I know there's lots of work right now that's out there talking about how psychedelics can benefit those folks in that space. However, even just doing it for ourselves, you talk about having intention and having the right environment and having someone around that knows what they're doing, that can also guide you through the process. So this isn't something we're talking about here where you can just do something on a weekend on a whim. It takes some research and it takes some time, because as you said, it is an opportunity that a door will get opened, and we have to be prepared to walk through that door and witness and be able to be held in a space, in a container that can allow us to do that. And so that we can have that feeling of safety as we go through it. Now, you marry this work with your life coaching as well, and your coaching business, and helping people find life purpose. What have you found to be the catalyst for this work that has really been so transformative
in the psychedelic context?
Yeah, well, and how it's worked, how you've been able to marry that work, the psychedelic piece, and helping people with purpose, they're finding their life purpose and living it. How is that combination working?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Psychedelics can give us a very different point of view than the one we typically hold with our limited and narrow sort of subjective kind of human ego, which we can't help, right? I don't want to be here like a bashing the ego, right? We need it to survive. But I think psychedelics can help us really zoom out and see a broader context for our lives, and ultimately come to a place where we're able to still have strong beliefs, but hold them in a lighter way. And I think one of the things that blocks people from finding purpose is a bit of maybe a narrow version of a story, or a rigid perspective of what the right answer is, or what the way of being is that they've married themselves to, that isn't deeply authentic to who they are, or maybe just limits their possibilities in some important way. And so I think psychedelics can help. I think Michael Pollan's metaphor is like to shake the snow globe. Like it sort of like loosens up those tracks in our mind and those like patterns of thought and behavior that we're really attached to, and helps us open up the options and create more space of possibility for what we want to achieve and create in our lives. And so that's what I think the really interesting opportunity is for psychedelics and purpose work, is to give people that much broader lens, that much more integrated or connected perspective, from which to create a set of goals for themselves in their lives, or a way of being that they want to live closer to in the world. So I really think it gives you a chance to hit reset and see something and feel something in a different way than you might have before, and really redefine some of that field of possibility that you see for yourself in your life, which can be hard to achieve in any other way. I mean, it can be done through a lot of, like I've heard people say, like one afternoon with mushrooms was like 3 years of therapy, right? So like it's accelerating this process of self-discovery in some contexts that can, really open up a space for greater possibility than you might have seen prior to that experience. And I want to speak to also something you said before about the kind of context and the container that you're in for that. I think that can be important too, to really understand what type of support you want, whether this is a therapeutic process for you, whether this is a personal growth process for you, whether this is something that has like deep spiritual and religious context, or you're coming at it from more of a like secular or scientific point of view. Find a care provider, find a coach, a facilitator, a therapist, a guide, a shaman that resonates with your perspective, that's going to really meet you where you are. Because I think ritual and ceremony are really important parts of the psychedelic journey, but there are also lots of ways to do this that aren't explicitly shamanic and ritualistic and religious, and don't have to be like explicitly medical either. There's lots of ways of approaching these plant and fungal allies that can meet you where you are. So I want to give people permission to kind of make it what they need it to be, and find somebody who really resonates with you in terms of their approach, and also what they help people get from the process. Is that what you want to get from the process? And I want to add a note about intention too, because this comes up a lot in my work. Intention and integration are sort of what sit before and after the journey. So intention is what you do going into the journey. Integration is what you do after. We've talked a little bit about what integration looks like, but intention is just as important as set and setting in these other factors. And it's important that you don't let your intentions become expectations or demands, right? This isn't Aladdin's lamp. And so you're not going to come into the journey and make a demand of this, process and get that result. I think it's much more helpful to think of intentions as a direction of travel rather than a destination you hope to arrive at. So instead of saying something like, I want to forgive my father, you know what I mean? As you drink your cup of mushroom tea, you might say something like, I want to explore my relationship with forgiveness, right? Can you keep it open-ended? Can you keep it as a direction instead of like, I require this outcome? Instead of saying, I want to find out the name for my new coaching program as you drink your ayahuasca, can you say, I want to explore my relationship with creativity and what's blocking me from bringing this vital life force into my life? And I think that can be something I see as a misstep, particularly in the personal development space as they engage with psychedelics. And in my kind of masculine, right, I'm very goal oriented and directive, and I get that dopamine hit from checking the box. It's really
the same thing.
It's a really easy trap to fall into, but psychedelics don't work that way. And I've seen people have really difficult experiences because they're like not getting the thing they wanted. One of my teachers and mentors, Daniel Shankin, calls it "Dude, where's my breakthrough syndrome?" And it's you're not just, it may not look the same for you as it does for someone else. So being really careful about how you set yourself up for the process and making sure that your intentions are clear, but they're open-ended. And that you're not making any expectations or demands that you arrive in a certain place in order for you to feel like that experience was successful for you.
That is such a great tip. And the thought that comes to my mind is about how we talk in our work. We talk about when we're working with spirit, that we're not worried about the destination so much as to what we aspire to become. Who do we need to become? What are those attributes? What are those pieces? And how do we show up that way? Because that is ultimately the result is what the result will be to your goal. Because you may think that this is the direction you want to go, or that's the goal I want to hit. But when we allow ourselves to be open, what we're doing is we're giving ourselves the opportunity to see something that's possibly even better than we could ever imagine. And so I think that's such a great point. Now, you also talk about in your work about authentic relating. So talk to me about the power and what's the power behind that and what's so unique about it.
I think what's unique about authentic relating is it's so simple I mean, I've been in this space now for several years, and I encounter a lot of frameworks for helping people grow and develop, particularly in relationship and communication, not just romantic relationship, but really the primary relationship we all have is with ourselves, right? So that's what I think of as relationship. Um, Self-awareness, right action, purpose, these are all parts of it. And authentic relating is so helpful because none of the concepts in it are like totally new. All of it, when I introduce it to teams, when I introduce it to individuals, they're all like, oh, yeah, I can think of an example of that in my life. And those 5 practices are welcome everything, assume nothing, reveal our experience, own our experience, and honor self and other. And I think of particularly for men and kind of this moment that masculinity is going through of like a bit of a gut check and an awakening of like, whoa, what does it mean to be a man in the world today? So many of these practices can support us with that, or of like welcoming everything is maybe not resisting a difficult experience or needing to jump into fix it mode all right away or be the savior in all of our relationships, like letting somebody else have a difficult experience with us and learn from it. Assuming nothing is like softening our reliance on our biases and our judgments or the stories we have, about somebody else or the judgments we've made about them, and really meeting them as they are in the present moment. And revealing our experience doesn't mean we need to tell everybody what we're thinking all the time. It means that we need to be honest with ourselves with what's arising. And I think for men in particular, we're really good at like not feeling our stuff. And so revealing our experience is getting like an emotional vocabulary, right? And a nuanced understanding of what's arising. Maybe I am tired today. I need to ask for a little bit more patience from my team. You know what I mean? Or maybe part of me is really upset with what you said, and another part of me is really curious about what I might have misunderstood. Can I lean into that part? Right. And then owning our experience is just recognizing that anything that we're giving or anything that we're blaming, we're giving our power to. Right. So it's like, are you blaming the economy? Are you blaming the banks? Are you blaming Bitcoin? Are you blaming your boss? Like whatever you're upset with that you feel like you don't control, you've just handed that thing your power. So how do you take ownership and take that back and really claim responsibility for your response? So I think it's kind of a goofy little turn of phrase, but responsibility is response ability. Right. So that's what ownership is. It's like you need to take responsibility for the response that you have to the world around you. And then honoring self and other, that final practice, is really just where those two meet in relationship. So what do I need and what do you need? And where do those needs meet? And when I teach this, I talk about the platinum rule, right? Everybody's heard of the golden rule, teach others as you want to be treated. But what we really need to do is treat others as they want to be treated. And so in order to do that, we need to be curious about their experience. We need to drop those assumptions, and we need to move forward to that relationship with a more informed perspective of what matters most to that individual, right? Because if your apology to me is 5 gallons of vanilla ice cream and I'm allergic to vanilla, it doesn't do much for me, So those 5 practices, I think, are really powerful and profound when you make them kind of a lifestyle. And it's not the 5 tenets of authentic relating, it's the 5 practices. So they're meant to be verbs. They're meant to be lived out. And I apply them at every level of my work, both with teams and organizations. I run them as trainings, and I do it in my one-on-one coaching as well, because it's really just about the art of being human. It doesn't matter if it's, CEO or a frontline manager or a husband or a brother or whatever. It always applies.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I really appreciate about those 5 practices is that it puts squarely the onus on ourselves and measuring ourselves and where we are in each step of the process. And I think and thanks for, bringing this to, and we keep it focused with the men aspect. And we are challenged right now trying to define what it means to be a man. What does it mean to be Alan? What does it mean to be Gabriel today, and how we fit in the world? Because the paradigm of what society would say was masculine is shifting and changing, and some would say it's shifting and changing for the worse, but I think it's shifting and changing for the better. I think there's opportunity for all of us to grow, and the work that I think is so important for men for us men to do is to see ourselves as whole and complete, and to really do the work on the shadow side that lots of Jungians will want to talk about, and about that the part of us that we just don't want to deal with, or the part of us that we think we have a story about that says, well, that's not really masculine. Well, who said that, and why isn't it? And how do we, to use your terminology, really start to integrate that, all aspects of ourselves, so we can be whole and complete in all situations. And once we built those skills, we get an opportunity to have a better response to the situations that maybe in the past we didn't have the greatest response.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought us back to integration, because that's the Latin root of that word is actually integrare, which is like to make whole again. And so I really think that's the process that I see men in masculinity going through in the world, is we're making ourselves whole again, where we have permission to access all of these parts of ourselves that maybe we were told didn't belong or weren't, appropriate, or like that's not manly enough, right? But integration really does mean making whole again. And so I think that's a beautiful place to land with this, is that that's what all of this work is for. With purpose, with psychedelics, with authentic relating, all of this stuff is to help us be whole in our lives, and be able to bring all the resources and the gifts that we have to offer the world to bear.
Absolutely. And that's the work that we're both doing. And so I think we need more of this type of work to be done. And I think I see lots of it happening, and I'm just grateful to be plugging in some small way, making some small dent in the universe to help live lives of purpose and meaning. Now, in your work, at some point, there's going to come a time where, where you're going to be a little bit older, and maybe, maybe not as have the energy that you have today to continue it. But if you were to look back 20 years from, or fast forward maybe 20 years from now and look back to where you are today, what would that legacy message be for you? What would be the thing that you would want people to say about the work you're doing and about who you have become?
Well, that's a really powerful question in terms of like the legacy piece, right? Because that definitely is, I've heard this called the immortality project. Everybody has this in their lives. For many of us, it's our children. For many of us, it's our work. So, right, what's the legacy you're leaving behind? I was really inspired by this quote by J.D. McClatchy. He says, "Love is the quality of attention we pay to things." And I really think that love is the quality of attention we pay to things. And I would want it to feel like I loved my life, and that I was in love with my life, and that the people in my life felt that love, whether it was through work or friendship or romance, that they felt how in love with them I am through the quality of attention and connection that we had. That to me is integrity, is being able to show up with that full open heart, that being in love with your life and with the present and with the people in the moments that you get to share in this precious time we have on earth. That's what I think I'd want to remain when I'm gone, is that lingering sense of love.
Oh, that is so powerful, Gabriel. Wow. I'm just floored by that response. That is amazing. Listen, of everything that we spoke about today, and maybe there wasn't something we had an opportunity to touch on, if there was something you'd want our listeners to take away with them, what would that be?
Go slow. I think, speaking of my experience as a man, it's tough to be gentle on ourselves when we're really seeking big change. And like everything we've talked about today is like big stuff, right? Like quitting your job and traveling on a bike and finding your purpose and meaning. Like it's big fish we're frying here. And so being gentle with ourselves and going slow and giving ourselves permission to make mistakes and be messy and really meet ourselves where we are with humility and love and excitement, right? Because I think it is a gift to be in the space of self-discovery and self-inquiry, and remembering that like you don't have to, that you get to, and that means you can go slow and make mistakes along the way, and that's all part of the process.
Oh, I just love that. What a great way to wrap up our conversation today. I just want to say thank you once again for spending time with me today and allowing us and giving us permission to allow our lives to be a bit messy as we find our purpose and start to live lives of purpose. If folks were interested in getting into touch with you and participating in your work and the programs you have, what would be the best way for them to do that?
I do use Instagram to share what I'm doing. I'm on there. I also talk a lot about mushrooms and foraging, which we didn't even touch on. That's right. I'm on there at Fungabe, FUNNGABE. So it's got 2 N's. And if you want to subscribe to my newsletter on my website, that's where I share a lot of the things I'm thinking about and the bigger picture of the work I'm doing in the world, you can learn more about that at my website, which is effectiveconnection.com.
Perfect. I'm going to make sure all that information, your socials, your website is all in the today's show notes. So posting the opportunity to get out and reach out to you. Once again, just want to say thank you so much for being on the show. I had a wonderful conversation.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.